Okay, so to make a long story short, this was a movie that I was originally going to have on this list proper, but then I watched another movie that I thought was significantly worse, and so I decided to add that movie onto the list instead. However, I still wanted this to be a top 15 list, so unfortunately, I had to sacrifice a movie on this list and move it down to dishonorable mention territory. So at number 10.5, I would like to give a very quick shout out to Kraven the Hunter, the other Sonyverse failure of 2024. I'm not gonna lie, I'm glad that I don't have to talk about this movie all that much. I went into great detail on why Madam Web was a bad movie, but this movie, it would have been impossible for me to go into any sort of detail on why it's bad, and that's for one simple reason. Now, you can say a lot of things about the other Sonyverse movies, a lot of different things about them, but to their credit, they are not boring. Kraven the Hunter, in comparison, is boring. The Venom movies have enough dumb fun moments in them to make them at least entertaining movies, even if they are objectively not very good movies. And then both Morbius and Madam Web are funny bad. You can watch both of these movies and you can laugh at them. You can make fun of how poorly made they are. You can't do that with Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter is a more competently made movie than Morbius and Madam Web, and ironically enough, I think it's a worse movie because of that. There is nothing funny bad about this movie. There's no It's Morbin time or anything like that for this movie. There's no he was in the Amazon doing research on spiders with my mom before she died or whatever the the saying is. There's nothing like that. There's no funny meme attached to this movie. It's boring as hell. I genuinely cannot remember a single thing that happens in this movie. It is an extremely dull movie with nothing to say about it at all, besides the fact that it's boring and dull. I would love to go into slightly more detail on why this movie is bad, but again, this is only a dishonorable mention, so I can't do that for better or worse. With that said, let's head back to the list proper. Number 10 is a movie that genuinely hurts me to put on this list because I wanted this movie to be a masterpiece. I thought this movie looked amazing, and I thought this was going to be one of the best movies of 2024. And yet, well, here we are instead. Number 10 is the pretentiously named Joker Folie à Deux, which from here on out will be referred to as Joker 2 for short. You're welcome. Now, Joker was a movie that arguably didn't need a sequel. There was no reason to give this movie a sequel. The movie had a deliberately ambiguous ending, leaving us to wonder what will happen to Arthur Fleck now. What will happen to this version of the Joker? It worked because it was left up to our imaginations. There wasn't a definitive answer, and there was never going to be a definitive answer. It was up to our imaginations what would happen to Arthur Fleck, what would happen to this version of the Joker. And then this movie ended up being a fucking massive success at the box office, $1 billion movie. And I guess that convinced Todd Phillips, director of both Joker movies, to make a sequel. Now, I was very skeptical about whether this movie needed to exist or not, but then all of that skepticism went away with the trailers. I thought this movie looked amazing from the trailers. Every time I was at the movies and I saw the trailer for this movie play beforehand, I was like, oh hell yeah, this movie's gonna be a fucking masterpiece. And then I saw the early reviews for this movie were negative, and I thought, okay, well the first Joker didn't do all that successful with critics. Critics were very mixed, polarized towards this movie, but audiences generally loved it, so maybe the same thing could happen with this movie. Except no, audiences hated this movie as well. I'm too lazy to check if this is still the case, but at some point, both the audience score and the critic score for this movie on Rotten Tomatoes, they were both at 32%. A perfectly balanced 32%, which I had never seen anything like that before. And then the movie came out and I watched it, and I gotta say, holy shit. this is not the worst movie of 2024, as evident by the fact that it's only at number 10, but it is easily the most disappointing movie of 2024. Every other movie on this list I went into knowing it was going to be bad in some way. This is the only movie where I went into it hoping it would be a good movie. In some aspects, that makes this movie worse than some of the later ranked movies, but I don't care. I'm gonna try and keep this segment as brief as I possibly can, considering the fact that I have made not one, not two, but 3 videos on this movie. So if you want to see me go into more detail on why this movie is bad, then you can always go and check out those videos. I'm gonna try and keep this segment brief, but I can't promise that it'll be brief, because there is a lot to unpack when it comes to why this movie is bad. This is a movie where virtually nothing happens in it. This movie has almost no semblance of a plot. Half of this movie is a musical, and the other half is a courtroom drama. And unfortunately, it is not a good courtroom drama, and it sure as hell isn't a good musical. Yeah, we're just getting the elephant in the room out of the way. I don't know why the hell they decided to make this movie a musical. It just gives you such tonal whiplash when you look at the way the first movie was. It's like the gritty 1970s feel that the first movie had is completely gone in this second movie, and the musical numbers are a big reason why that's the case. It feels like I'm watching a parody of the first movie, and not a sequel to the first movie. If the first Joker was the original movie adaptation of Pink Floyd's The Wall, then Joker 2 over here is the nostalgia critic review of Pink Floyd's The Wall. That's the best way I could describe it. Most of the musical numbers as well are fantasy sequences, meaning they don't actually happen. And that is going to be a pretty big thing that I will go into more detail about later on. But something that I will say is that the set designs for some of these musical numbers, they are really good. I like the way that some of these musical numbers look. I think the set design can be really good for some of these musical numbers. It obviously doesn't justify the fact that this movie is a musical, but you know, at least the musical numbers are nice to look at. I like the way they look. The set designs are nice. Something else that I will also praise this movie for is Joaquin Phoenix is fantastic as the titular Joker, as Arthur Fleck, much like in the first movie. As a matter of fact, his performance is so good that it almost makes you forget about how shitty this movie is. You're watching this movie and you're not even paying attention to like the context or anything like that. You're just so focused on how great of a delivery Joaquin Phoenix is giving. It almost makes you forget, why do people hate this movie? Why do people think this movie is bad? And then 2 minutes later, the movie hits you with a musical number, and then you get reminded, oh yeah, that's why people hate this movie. Never mind then. But yeah, Joaquin Phoenix is fantastic in this movie, much like in the first movie, and I wish I could say the same thing about Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, but unfortunately she's barely in the movie, and her character barely does anything at all. The whole marketing for this movie focuses on the fact that this version of the Joker finally has his own Harley Quinn, and the movie chooses to do nothing with that. The chemistry between these two characters are virtually non-existent. The only times you ever see these characters together are during the fantasy sequence musical numbers. In the actual real-world scenes, they're not there together. Very rarely are they together. For those that went into this movie expecting it to be a Bonnie and Clyde story with these two characters, yeah, you're gonna be really disappointed. This movie is supposed to be a commentary, I suppose, on certain people that liked the first Joker for the wrong reasons. I'm sure you're well aware that there are characters from certain movies and TV shows that people like them even though they're not supposed to like them. People look up to Patrick Bateman and Tyler Durden, even though the point of both American Psycho and Fight Club is that they're terrible people. These are both terrible characters that should not be looked up to. And Joaquin Phoenix's version of the Joker unfortunately joined that club. One could argue that every version of the Joker is part of this club. You know, you could say that Heath Ledger's version is part of this club as well. But I'd say it's especially Joaquin Phoenix's version that is part of this club where it's like you missed the point if you like this character. This movie is supposed to criticize the incel we live in a society fans of the first movie. There are people that like this movie for the wrong reasons, and it almost makes me scared to talk about why I think the first movie is really good. Sometimes it's hard to criticize a movie, even if it's a genuinely bad movie, simply because the wrong people hate it. And other times, it's hard to praise a movie, even if it is a good movie, simply because the wrong people like it. It's sad, but it happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. The problem is, this movie treats everyone that liked the first Joker like they're these incel we live in a society people that like the first movie for the wrong reasons. This movie acts as a giant you to everyone, and I mean everyone that likes the first Joker, regardless of why they like it. I've seen a lot of people speculate that this movie was made to be deliberately unsatisfying. The people who went into this expecting a Bonnie and Clyde story with these two characters, they end up getting nothing like that at all. The thing is, though, it is entirely possible to give people what they want. You can have these two characters going around committing crimes. You can have a Bonnie and Clyde story with these two characters and also act as a criticism towards the incel fans of the first movie, the people that like the first movie for the wrong reasons. You can simultaneously do both of those things, and yet the movie chooses to not do that for some reason. Just blindly assume that everyone that likes the first Joker is a we live in a society incel. The problem is not the fact that they're calling out the incel fans. The problem is that they're treating everyone that liked the first movie like they're the incel fans, and that's not true at all. And it's just a really boring movie as well. It's just such an unsatisfying movie, made for literally nobody. Who is this movie made for? I think that's a question that I'm going to ask a lot of times throughout this list. Who is this movie made for? If you liked the first Joker, you're gonna hate this movie. If you hated the first Joker, then, well, why the hell would you watch this movie? Outside of morbid curiosity, I guess. This movie completely undoes everything that was established in the first Joker, so maybe if you hate the first Joker, you could like this movie because of that, but I don't know. I've never seen anyone say they hate the first Joker but love this movie. People that love the first Joker hate this movie, and people that hate the first Joker hate this movie as well. Who the hell is this movie made for? Earlier on this list, I talked about The Crow, and I brought up how, upon a rewatch, this movie eerily reminded me of another movie that I would cover later on this list. Joker 2 is that movie. I was rewatching The Crow, and I was amazed by how similar these two movies were. At least at the very beginning they were. The beginning of The Crow takes place in this rehab center, while Joker 2 primarily takes place in Arkham Asylum. Rehab center, asylum, tomato, you know, they're similar enough. They're like prison adjacent places, whatever. They have enough similarities, I don't care. You have these two people, a man and a woman. They meet together and they almost immediately fall in love. The Crow has FKA Twigs, a female musician. Joker 2 has Lady Gaga, a female musician. There's a scene where these two try and escape from their prison. In The Crow's case, they succeed. In Joker 2's case, they fail. That's pretty much where the similarities between the two movies end. To give The Crow a little bit of credit, at least there's stuff that happens in it. At least it could be funny because of how try-hard edgy it is. And at least it has the opera scene, which is an absolute f***ing masterpiece of a scene. Joker 2 doesn't have anything like that. It's just a waste of time is what it is. Not to mention, both of these movies came out not that far apart from each other. The Crow came out at the end of August, while Joker 2 came out at the beginning of October. I don't know how I watched this movie in theaters and not notice the similarities between it and The Crow. Not only that, but I am also amazed at the fact that this random movie was somehow able to remind me of two completely different but very terrible movies with the Joker and Harley Quinn in them. How the hell was The Crow able to do that? How? Oh yeah, speaking of which, when I reviewed The Crow, I briefly referenced all of those really cringy memes that people would make with Jared Leto's Joker and Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. Yeah, alternate universe where Joker 2 was a good movie. Do you guys think people would be making these kinds of memes with Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga? Maybe Todd Phillips intentionally made this movie bad so that his versions of the Joker and Harley Quinn didn't have to have these cringy memes made with them. If that's the case, then, well, I can't really blame him for making the movie this way. I can't blame him at all. At the same time, though, if that wasn't the case, then, yeah, this movie was a massive flop at the box office. It had a huge budget of $200 million, and it does not feel like a $200 million budget movie. The first movie had a budget of, I believe, $50 million, and it's like, there's more stuff that happens in it. It feels a lot more like, it doesn't feel like a $200 million movie necessarily, but it feels more like one than this movie. When you make a deliberately unsatisfying movie that ultimately pleases nobody, do not be surprised if that movie ends up flopping at the box office. Do not expect this movie to become a billion-dollar smash hit. That is all that I'm going to say. I'm not sure what the bigger joke is. This movie, or the fact that we thought this movie would be good. Let us move on. Number 9 is a movie that I'm sure y'all were expecting me to talk about at some point on this list, and well, here it is. I'm finally talking about it. Maybe I'm putting this movie too high up, but I don't care. I genuinely don't think this movie is as bad as some of the later movies on this list, so here it is at number 9. Even though it's not the worst movie ever made, it is arguably the most unnecessary movie ever made. Number 9 is Mufasa, the Lion King. I had to sit down and watch this movie twice. The first time, I didn't even finish the movie because it was so unbelievably boring. Well, also that and the fact that the cam rip that I had available was not very good. So here we are now, months later, we finally have a proper official HD release of the movie. I knew right from the get-go I would be talking about this movie in some way on this list, whether it be a dishonorable mention or it's on the list proper. So I took 2 hours out of my day to watch this movie once and for all. And Jesus Christ, this movie is a slog to get through. The entire time I'm sitting down watching this movie, I'm just thinking to myself, why should I care about any of this? Why should I consider any of this canon to the events of the original Lion King? I don't know if this is relevant information or not, but I have surprisingly never seen the 2019 Lion King remake. I don't think I need to though, because I've already seen the good version of the Lion King, and I'll stick with that, thank you very much. So here we are now with a prequel to the Lion King that answers all of the questions that were on none of our minds. How did Mufasa become the Lion King? Why is Scar evil? Important questions that are on all of our minds whenever we watch the original 1994 classic. And yet, despite everything, there's a small part of me that's convinced, maybe this movie could work. Maybe this movie actually isn't the most unnecessary movie ever made. Maybe the problem with this movie is not the idea behind it, but rather it's the execution. Unsurprisingly, much like the 2019 Lion King remake, this movie has the same photorealistic style. Now, I've never seen the 2019 Lion King remake as mentioned before, but one of the biggest criticisms I've heard people give it is that everything looks too realistic. None of the characters have any sort of emotion. None of the characters convey any sort of facial emotion when compared to in the original movie. I guess they they kind of fix that in this movie. The characters are a little bit more expressive, but it's still far from a good thing because it does not clash well with the photorealistic art style. So now we go from a National Geographic documentary to the Uncanny Valley. How the hell does this movie from 2024 somehow have CGI that's on par with those live-action Scooby-Doo movies from the early 2000s? Actually, no, those movies are a goddamn national treasure. I shouldn't be disrespecting them like that. I apologize. I'm not one of those weirdos that make a big deal about 2D animation versus 3D animation, but this is a movie that would have greatly benefited from being 2D animated. For one thing, it would have helped make the audiences more engaged with this storyline. It would make it easier for people to care about what goes on in this movie, to have them consider it canon to the lore of the Lion King, and it would also allow for me to tell which character is which. Now, obviously, there are a lot of lions in this movie. What a shocker. There are a lot of lions in this movie about lions. The thing is, because of the photorealistic art style that the movie has, it is near damn impossible to tell who is who. This could have been prevented if the movie retained the 2D animation style that the original Lion King had. Actually, no, it. Maybe it's somehow possible to have this in like 3D, have this in CGI. I don't see why not. As long as it looks cartoony, that allows for the audience to tell, which character is which. When you have everything be photorealistic, it is really hard to tell who is who. There's a scene early on into the movie where you have Mufasa as a cub alongside his parents, and it is very easy to mistake this as being, this is Simba as a cub, and then you have Mufasa right there. Even though that's not the case, Mufasa is the cub. Simba doesn't exist in this part of the movie. You wouldn't know that though, because of the photorealistic animation. When you have every character look virtually identical to each other, it makes it harder to care about any of these characters, and subsequently it makes it harder to engage with the storyline, with what's going on in this movie. Oh yeah, this movie is also told as a flashback by Rafiki to Kiara. Yes, Kiara from Lion King 2. Simba barely appears in the movie for better or worse. He has to go somewhere, I don't know, it's something stupid. And so he leaves Rafiki to babysit Kiara alongside Timon and Pumbaa. Rafiki is the one that tells the story, the main story with Mufasa and Scar and whatever. While Timon and Pumbaa occasionally appear, the movie cuts back to present day where we have Timon and Pumbaa as the obvious comedic relief. Except they are not funny in the slightest. They are unbelievably annoying in every scene that they're in. Every time these two characters appeared on screen, I had to pause the movie and remind myself that people willingly chose to go and see this movie instead of Sonic Adventure 2 in movie form. That is ridiculous to me. Oh yeah, you want to know the reason Scar becomes a bad guy? Yeah, it's because of a girl. I'm not kidding, it's because of a girl. So midway into the movie, Mufasa and Scar meet this third girl lion. I don't know her name, I don't care either. And as it turns out, Scar has a crush on her. But it turns out the girl lion doesn't want Scar, she wants Mufasa. And so Scar becomes jealous and whatever, and so he teams up with the villain lions. So there you have it. There's the origin story for Scar, explaining why he's evil. The next time you watch the original Lion King, and you just look at how cool of a villain Scar is, just remember all of this is because of a girl. Man, what the are they doing at Disney for real? What the hell, man? Despite everything I've brought up, the main problem that this movie has is that it is so unbelievably boring to sit through. I will never not be amazed at the fact that somehow this movie made more money than Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which opened on the same day. That's the power of Disney, adults, for you. Never underestimate the power of millennials who still think Disney is a company worth respecting in this day and age just because they made a really good movie about lions over 30 years ago. Disney was good back in 1994. That means they're still good in 2025, because that's clearly how it works. While we're on the subject of creative bankruptcy, let's move on to number 8, shall we? Number 8 is a movie that I'm sure y'all are gonna look at me and you're gonna be like, bro, why the hell did you watch this movie? What compelled you to watch this movie? And I promise y'all, I can explain, okay? I can explain. Number 8 is the Mean Girls remake. Now, the original Mean Girls from 2004 needs no introduction. It is one of the most iconic comedies of the 2000s, if not of all time. It is an integral part of 2000s pop culture, and it is one of the most quotable movies of all time. It is a classic in every sense of the word. So it's no surprise that Hollywood, being Hollywood, decides, you know what? Let's take this beloved movie that doesn't need to be remade and let's remake it. And let's also make it a musical just to add insult to injury. Well, actually, no. I should be a little bit more fair. This movie isn't really much of a remake of the original Mean Girls, so much so as it is an adaptation of the Broadway musical. And yes, there was a Broadway musical based on Mean Girls. So at the very least, this movie kind of has a reason to be a musical, which is more than I could say for Joker 2. Unfortunately though, there is no reason at all, I repeat, no reason at all, for this movie to exist. As far as movie remakes go, I genuinely cannot think of a movie that has even less of a reason to exist. This movie gives you no reason to watch it over the original 2004 movie. There are no advantages to watching this movie over the original 2004 movie. This movie fails to convince you that, yeah, this is the definitive version of Mean Girls that you should watch. Forget about that original 2004 version. This isn't even like a Willy Wonka situation where it's like you have the original movie and you have the remake, and it's like there are enough differences between the two movies to help justify both of their existences. And so it's like the two movies can coexist together. You can have two alternate versions of the same storyline, and there are enough differences to justify both of their existences. This movie is not like that at all. This movie is inferior to the original movie in almost every single way. I understand that maybe I shouldn't rank this movie below some of the previous movies that I've talked about on this list. I mean, the movie's not really that low on the list. It is smack dab in the middle after all. There are 7 movies that are better than this, but there are also 7 movies that are worse than this. At the same time though, I feel like maybe I shouldn't rank this movie below something like Madam Web, because Madam Web is a far worse movie quality-wise than Mean Girls, and yet I think this movie is worse just because of what it represents. I think this movie is worse just because of what it stands for. Madam Web is a poorly made movie. Simple as that. Nothing more, nothing less. Mean Girls perfectly showcases how creatively bankrupt Hollywood is. Take a movie that has no reason to be remade, a movie that's already perfectly fine as is, and just remake it again, and then give the audience no reason at all to watch it over the original movie. If you've seen the original Mean Girls, why the hell would you want to watch this new version? Because of the songs? Well, I'm sure you could easily find the original songs from the Broadway show online, and even then, these songs aren't even all that good to begin with. They're the most generic TikTok pop songs I've ever heard in my life. It's TikTok bait is what it is. You know the term Oscar bait? Yeah, well, allow me to coin a new term, TikTok bait. You hear a song and it's like extremely obvious that this song was only made just to go viral on TikTok. It's like industry plants, but for a song and not an artist. Arguably, the whole movie is TikTok bait because the movie's a lot more modernized in a way. The movie does feature different scenes of like this TikTok-esque app, and it is the most how do you do fellow kids thing I've ever seen in my life. And it will do nothing but completely date this movie even more than it already was beforehand. It's interesting to me how the original Mean Girls is such a quintessentially 2004 movie. It's a movie that could have only come out in 2004, not in 2003, not in 2005, no, in 2004. And yet, despite feeling very 2004, the movie still manages to be timeless. This movie, in comparison, feels very 2024, and it's like, you just know in the future, in the nearby future, this movie will come across as outdated. Arguably, it already is outdated. I remember reading something that this movie was supposed to be a Paramount Plus exclusive, but eventually decided to change it to a theatrical release. And I think this movie would have worked better as a streaming movie. Because I'm sorry, but I just find it ridiculous, the idea of like going to spend money at a movie theater, spending money buying the tickets, buying the food, whatever, just for what is essentially an inferior version of an old movie. And once again, this movie gives you no reason to watch it over the original Mean Girls. For those wondering, no, I did not go and see this movie when it came out in theaters, thankfully. You might be wondering why I watched this movie in the first place, and the reason why is because around the latter half of 2024, I came up with like this watch list where I would go out of my way to try and watch some of the movies that came out earlier into the year that I missed out on, and the Mean Girls remake was one of those movies. Now, I think this might have affected the way that I look at this movie, but similarly to Kung Fu Panda 4, I decided to watch the original Mean Girls shortly before this remake. I think I've seen the original Mean Girls before, like an extremely long time ago, but I have very little memories of it. So, you know, a refresher didn't hurt. Much like with Kung Fu Panda 4, I probably wouldn't have noticed how terrible and unnecessary this Mean Girls remake is unless I watched the original movie first. It's like I watched the original Mean Girls, and then like 2 nights later I watched the remake, and it's like I felt like I was watching the same movie twice. Certain scenes, certain lines of dialogue from the original movie were just repeated word for word in this movie, and it just made me question even more, why does this movie exist? Who was asking for this movie? I don't know how much sense this is going to make, but just bear with me on this. As I mentioned earlier before, the original Mean Girls has a reputation for being one of the most quotable movies of all time. Naturally, this remake contains a lot of the iconic quotes that the original movie had. The thing is, though, I don't know how I could be able to elaborate on this. Every time these iconic quotes are said in this movie, it just feels very forced. I don't know why. In the original movie, it comes across as being natural. In this movie, every iconic quote that's said, it feels like forced nostalgia bait. It doesn't come off as natural or authentic like in the original movie. Think of any iconic quote from the original movie. It's October 3rd. On Wednesdays we wear pink. Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not gonna happen. These quotes are in the remake, and it's like, for whatever reason, just the way that they feel in this remake, it comes across like the movie wants you to point at the screen and be like, look guys, look, they said the line, they said the funny meme line. Isn't that crazy, guys? Isn't that crazy? It's nostalgia bait in its purest form. Again, I'm not sure how much sense this is gonna make, but that's just the way that I look at it. Now, 2024 was a year that gave us a lot, and I mean a lot, of different box office flops. Most of the movies that are on this list were box office flops. Some of these movies were released to streaming, a select few of these movies were successful, And then you have this movie, which is just a dilemma. This movie only made about $100 million or so at the box office, but the budget for this movie was, I believe, only 30-something million dollars. After all, this was originally supposed to be a streaming movie. Now, I'm not all too familiar with how box office stuff works for me to say, like, is this a success? Is this a flop? I don't know. But maybe I'm a little bit overreacting when it comes to this movie and just the idea of such a movie existing. Remake a movie that doesn't need to be remade. Modernize a movie that doesn't need to be modernized. Once again, I'm going to ask, who the hell asked for this movie? But at the same time, maybe I shouldn't treat this movie like it was a billion-dollar success or anything like that. This movie's box office was relatively low, although I guess maybe it was a mild success given the low budget that the movie had. I'm not sure. It's very debatable. And either way, it doesn't really matter because most people have already forgotten about this movie's existence. The original Mean Girls from 2004 will live on as a comedy classic, but this movie is just whatever. Who the f needed this? Why did this movie need to happen? Who was asking for this movie? Mean Girls 2024, the most pointless movie remake not made by Disney. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I'm not looking forward to the super bad musical remake that's gonna come out in 2027. Maybe then the movie will finally live up to its name. Number 7 is... okay, I can't think of any jokes for this part. Number 7 is Megalopolis. Finally, for the first time on this list, we have a completely original movie. Not a sequel, not a prequel, not a remake, not in any way attached to an already established famous character, nothing like that. For the first time on this list, we have a movie that is purely original. We have a movie that just has a completely original, completely unique story. And lo and behold, the movie is fucking hot garbage. I gotta admit, this movie does feel a little bit like a curveball, you know? Throughout most of this list, we've talked about the easy target, crappy blockbuster movies like Madam Web and Mufasa and whatever, and then here we are talking about this artsy-fartsy, pretentious, we live in a society movie. Well, actually, no, I can't even tell if this is we live in a society or not. If you know anything about Megalopolis, you would know that this movie's plot is all over the fucking place. It is near damn impossible for me to tell you what this movie is about. There is so much that happens in this movie's plot that it's like, it's impossible. Like, you know, sometimes there are moments in the movie where it's like I get a vague understanding of what's going on, and then most of the time it's just like overshadowed by a bunch of like random bullcrap happening. So the movie takes place in New Rome, I guess, which is like kind of like New York City and Rome combined, I don't know. And you have the two main characters of the movie, Adam Driver's character and Giancarlo Esposito's character. Adam Driver's character is named Caesar, while Giancarlo Esposito's character is named Cicero. Ah yes, let's give the two main characters of this movie strikingly similar names, because clearly this movie's storyline isn't fucking confusing enough already. Caesar has this like magical element or whatever called Megalon, which he intends to use to build Megalopolis, which is supposed to be this like dream magical utopia or whatever. However, Cicero, who is also the mayor of New Rome, is against this idea. Cicero also has a daughter named, I think, Julie, something adjacent to that. And she ends up falling in love with Caesar, much to Cicero's dismay. And that right there is the most that I could tell you about this movie's plot. That is an extremely vague summary of what this movie's about. That's like 3% of the movie's plot I just gave you, because there is so much that goes on in this movie that's like trying to describe what happens in this movie is goddamn impossible. There's just certain details about this movie, certain things that happen in this movie that just, they happen for the sake of happening. Caesar has the ability to stop time. He only does it in a few scenes and that's it, and not once in the entire movie is it ever an important plot factor. Not once is it ever important to the movie that Caesar has the ability to stop time. It's just a cool thing that he's able to do, and that's it. There's also this like subplot where it's like Caesar had a wife and I guess he murdered her for reasons, I don't know. I think it's like the movie goes back and forth on like, did he do it? Did he not do it? I don't know. It's so confusing, this movie's plot. There's a scene where alleged footage resurfaces of Caesar doing, to put this in the tamest way possible, something bad to an underage girl. A girl that's like supposedly 16 years old. And then as it turns out, no, actually she's 23 years old. She's not 16 years old. And then as it also turns out, the footage was fake. It was a deep fake or something like that. It's like a big plot point in the movie for like 5 minutes, and then it's resolved, and then it's never brought up again for the rest of the movie. And you're just left wondering, okay, what the was the point of that? Why was that in the movie? I'm guessing it's supposed to be like a statement about cancel culture or something like that, which is real fucking ironic considering who directed this movie, but I'll get into that later on. There's just all kinds of shit that goes on in this movie, and it's like sometimes it doesn't have any purpose in the movie. I remember when this movie came out, there were people that were trying to defend it by claiming that it's an original story. You can't complain that every movie that comes out nowadays is a sequel and a remake and then completely ignore this original movie and let it flop. Yeah, well, guess what? Megalopolis is an original movie, but it's a bad original movie. Now, this might seem like a crazy thing to consider, but sometimes original movies can be bad. Listen, I'm tired of the constant sequels and remakes just as much as y'all are, but I'm not going to give this movie brownie points just because it tells an original story, especially considering the fact that it tells its original story just as, if not more poorly, than a lot of sequels and remakes do. The fact that the Mean Girls remake and this movie are right next to each other on the ranking is proof that yes, original movies can be bad as well. Original movies can very easily be just as as your average pointless sequel or remake. I am not giving this movie brownie points just because it tells an original story. It's gonna have to do a lot more than that, and I mean a lot more than that, if it wants to convince me that it's a good movie. I'm also not going to give this movie brownie points just because it was made by a famous director. This movie was directed by Francis Ford Coppola, who is best known for the Godfather movies and Apocalypse Now. This was apparently a passion project that he had in development for a very long time. This movie went through serious development hell. You watch the movie and it's like extremely obvious, yeah, this movie had to have gone through some form of development hell. Apparently, development on this movie started all the way back in the late 70s, before finally seeing the light of day in 2024. Apparently, given the strange, bizarre nature of this movie's storyline, this movie's structure, this movie's everything, there was not a single major film studio that wanted to pick this movie up for distribution. And then the movie was finally able to be released in some way. And it ended up being a massive flop. And I mean a massive flop. This movie had a budget of, I believe, $136 million, $120 million, I'm not sure. And it only made $14 million at the box office, and that was it. But to get back on topic, I am not giving this movie brownie points just because it was made by the same guy who made The Godfather over half a century ago. I also saw people defend this movie when it came out, claiming that like, no, you can't say this movie's bad, it's from the same guy who made Apocalypse Now, and it's like, so? The movie's still garbage? Just because Francis Ford Coppola made a really good movie back then, that doesn't mean this movie is good as well. If Martin Scorsese ever made a bad movie, I'm not gonna pretend that it's a good movie just because it was made by Martin Scorsese. If Quentin Tarantino ever made a bad movie, I'm not gonna pretend that it's a good movie just because it was made by Quentin Tarantino. Hypothetically speaking, let's say Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey were to be bad for whatever reason. There's a very high chance that it'll end up being a masterpiece, but let's just say, for whatever reason, the movie ends up being bad. And then what? what are you gonna do? Are you gonna pretend that the movie is good just because it has Christopher Nolan's name on it? Are you gonna pretend that it's a good movie just because, oh, but he made Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer was a good movie, so that means The Odyssey is a good movie as well? No. That's not how it works. It doesn't work like that. If a director makes a bad movie, then they made a bad movie, period. The quality of a director's other movies do not dictate the quality of this one bad movie they put out. Francis Ford Coppola made 3 of the greatest movies of all time, with the first 2 Godfathers and Apocalypse Now, and he's also made Megalopolis, which is complete dog shit. 2 things can be true at the same time. Oh yeah, let's not forget as well, even before this godforsaken movie came out, there was already a whole lot of shit going on with it. If I remember correctly, there was a trailer that was released for this movie that had like negative reviews for The Godfather and Apocalypse Now attached to it. I guess to show that like, yeah, these were controversial, hated movies back then, but now they're agreed to be masterpieces, so maybe the same thing will happen with Megalopolis. And then as it turns out, no, these quotes never existed. They were AI generated. They went to ChatGPT and they're like, yo, write down a few negative reviews for The Godfather, and ChatGPT was like, alright, say no more, I got you, fam. People immediately noticed that, and I think like only a day later they took down the trailer. Even long before this damn movie came out, people knew it would be a fucking dumpster fire. And then on a more serious note, video footage would resurface of Francis Ford Coppola, I believe, like groping, harassing the woman on set of the movie, kissing them without their consent, I believe. And remember, this guy is 80 something years old, so it's like, you know, they're both adults, but it's still really weird regardless. Combine that with the fact that I remember reading something that apparently Francis Ford Coppola defended a pedophile director, I think, and then it makes the brief cancel culture subplot in Megalopolis a lot more, why the hell would you put that in your movie? What the is wrong with you, you know? Now, to move on to slightly more lighthearted territory, I rewatched this movie thinking, okay, you know what, maybe this movie could be a little bit funny bad. Maybe the unhinged nature of this movie and its storyline, maybe that could be funny in retrospect. I rewatched the movie, no, it's not funny. Admittedly, for the most part, I was kind of intrigued, I guess, by the movie and what was going on in it. Yes, sometimes the movie was boring, of course it was, but overall I found myself paying attention to what was going on in the movie a lot more than I would have expected. Of course, no matter how hard you pay attention to the movie's plot, it's still impossible to understand what's going on in it, but still, this movie has a lot of potential to become the next so bad it's good classic movie. This could have been the next The Room, the next Birdemic, the next Troll 2, and unfortunately, it's not. There's only 2 funny bad moments in the entire movie, and that's it. One of them happens early on into the movie, the other one happens near the end of the movie. I'm sure most of you are very well aware of the infamous "so go back to the club." That scene right there, that is a f***ing hilarious scene. It's not even intended to be hilarious, and yet it is. This movie would have been so much better if the entire movie was like this one scene. Unfortunately, it's not. And the second funny bad moment is near the end of the movie. So there's like this old rich guy who's played by Jon Voight, and I don't know a single thing. Listen, I don't feel like describing this character, okay? It's a nightmare to describe it, okay? But basically there's these 2 characters that come to visit him because they think like he's sick and he's gonna die and whatever. And then they notice that he has like a massive boner, and then as it turns out, it's not a boner, it's a arrow, and he ends up shooting both of the people with the arrow, and it's such a weird, like, absurd thing. And reminder, this movie is not a comedy. This is not a movie that's like, oh, it's funny, haha, it makes me laugh. No, this is a movie that I'm supposed to take seriously. And then you have a scene like this in your movie, and it's like, am I watching a Adam Sandler movie, or am I watching a movie from the guy who made The Godfather? What the hell is going on? Oh yeah, speaking of Jon Voight, I guess there was like this whole thing with Francis Ford Coppola where like he would hire canceled actors in his movie. In addition to Jon Voight, who's apparently this like vocal Trump supporter, you also have Shia LaBeouf, I think that's how you pronounce his name, in this movie. And for whatever reason, he plays like a character that's like in drag. I don't know. For some reason, this character hates Caesar, and so he's the one that provides like the fake video of Caesar and the girl that I mentioned earlier. And then after that's resolved, his character is never seen again for the rest of the movie. But going back to the actor, I believe Shia LaBeouf has like allegations against him. I don't remember the specific allegations, but there are supposedly allegations against him. So Francis over here is just hiring like canceled actors in his movie just for the sake of, I don't know, to make a statement. I don't know. It's so damn stupid. This is yet another movie where I have to wonder, who was this movie made for? This is obviously a movie that won't have much mass appeal, as evident by the fact that it only made $14 million at the box office. I guess you'd have to be a really pretentious cinephile to enjoy this movie, but I don't know. I think this movie was made for one person, and only one person, and that person was Francis Ford Coppola. And you know, there's a small part of me that wants to be like, oh, I'm glad this movie finally got to see the light of day, since this was supposedly a passion project of his, and it was in development hell since the late 70s. But considering the 1-2 combo punch of Megalopolis being a movie and Francis Ford Coppola being a person, it's like, no, I don't know if that really matters all that much. This movie might have finally seen the light of day, but does that really matter if the movie is bad? Watching this movie and thinking about how it was in development hell, it just made me think, you know, maybe this movie was good at one point. Admittedly, you watch this movie and it's like, there are few moments in it, there are a few moments in the movie where, yeah, this kind of has the potential to be a good movie. There are very small bits and pieces of a good movie in here, but it's cluttered with all kinds of pretentious bullshit going on. Maybe somewhere out there exists an alternate universe where Megalopolis came out in like the 80s or something, and it's a masterpiece movie. It's considered one of the greatest movies ever made. Another Francis Ford Coppola masterpiece. But alas, we do not live in that timeline. No siree, we do not live in that timeline at all. With all of that said, let us move on to the next movie on the list. For number 6, I'm going to ask y'all a question. What happens when you take a cult classic animated movie from nearly 15 years ago and you bring it back, except it has almost nothing that made the original animated movie good? Well, I'll tell you what you get. You get Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. That's right, 2 mega stinkers back to back, just like that. Now some of you might be wondering, why am I putting this movie at number 6? Why is this not in the bottom 5? Well, I have 2 reasons. Number 1, I genuinely think that the bottom 5 movies are far worse than Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, as bad as it may be. And number 2, I don't know, I feel like this movie is kind of low-hanging fruit. I mean, yeah, it's awful, don't get me wrong, this movie is trash, I'm not defending it, but it kind of feels unfair for me to put this below movies like Madam Web and Joker 2 and Mufasa, because like those are real movies. Those are actual proper movies. And then Megamind 2 over here is just generic, cheaply made, low budget, straight to streaming slop for babies. It's bad, obviously, but you know, it doesn't really feel fair to put this below Megalopolis, because Megalopolis is at least a real movie. That being said though, this movie is still really awful, so yeah, I don't care. Number 6 is the highest I could put this movie, so just bear with me. Now, I've made 2 videos on this movie. The first one covered the initial reveal trailer for the movie, and the second one covered the movie itself. I feel like I went into good enough detail on why this movie is bad in my proper review for it, and given the fact that everyone has already talked about why this movie is bad, I'm probably going to keep this segment brief. For those that somehow have no idea what any of this is all about, allow me to explain. So in 2010, DreamWorks put out a movie called Megamind, and at the time it got good reviews, but it wasn't considered anything particularly special. A major point of criticism at the time when the movie came out was that it felt too derivative of other animated movies, such as The Incredibles and Despicable Me, which had only come out a few months earlier. Both Megamind and Despicable Me focus on a supervillain who, by the end of the movie, becomes a hero. Gru, the protagonist of Despicable Me, has an army of minions, while Megamind has a sidekick named Minion. The similarities to Despicable Me, I want to imagine, hindered this movie's chances of being more successful, and so alas, the movie ended up being forgotten about for most of the 2010s. In the early 2020s though, more and more people started giving this movie a lot more attention. Those that grew up watching the movie in the early 2010s rewatched the movie and found that it was surprisingly better than they remembered it being. The movie was praised for its many subversions of the superhero movie genre, which, remember, this came out in 2010, so yeah, this was after Iron Man and The Dark Knight changed the genre and made it big, but this was before Avengers 2012, which I want to say was when superhero movies became what they are today. There were only 3 MCU movies when this came out, just keep that in mind. The surprisingly fresh take that the movie had on the superhero genre hit hard in the early 2020s, as we were, and probably still are, going through a period where people are bored and sick of superhero movies. People criticize superhero movies for feeling very derivative and formulaic, a phenomenon widely referred to as superhero fatigue. Just like that, Megamind went from being one of the most overlooked DreamWorks movies to now being considered one of the best DreamWorks movies, a movie that deserved better. In a better universe, this movie could have become one of the big DreamWorks franchises alongside Shrek, Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, and How to Train Your Dragon, but unfortunately that never happened. Our wishes for a Megamind follow-up were seemingly granted in 2022 when it was announced that there would be a new Megamind TV show coming out. This was back in 2022. We would have to wait 2 years for an update on this. And then one day in 2024, they release a trailer for Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. Finally, after all this time, we have a Megamind 2, and it's unfortunately not what people expected out of it. From the trailer alone, you could already pinpoint there's a lot of things that are wrong with this movie. You don't even have to watch the whole movie, you could just watch this trailer and it tells you a lot of why the movie didn't work. For starters, the animation is much worse quality than in the first Megamind. Something that I think is very important to note is that this movie was not made by DreamWorks themselves, it was made by their television subsidiary, which explains why the animation looks like this. It still looks bad, but at least there's kind of a reason why it looks bad. Secondly, none of the voice actors from the first movie reprised their roles for this movie. Will Ferrell didn't come back to voice Megamind, David Cross didn't come back to voice Minion, etc. Again, this is a significantly lower budget movie, so I want to imagine it would have been impossible to get the celebrity voice actors back, but I'm still just putting that out there. And the third reason why people hated this movie, and this is the most important reason right here, this is the one reason that I cannot defend and be like, oh, it's okay because the movie had a low budget. This movie seemingly retconned a lot of the important details that the first Megamind had. In this movie, the titular Doom Syndicate was an old team of supervillains that Megamind was a part of, which was something that was never alluded to once in the original movie. At the beginning of the first movie, Megamind was completely alone. He had Minion and no one else. Nobody liked him. In contrast, everyone loved Metro Man. And this is what motivates Megamind to become a supervillain and to start a lifelong rivalry with Metro Man. This movie just completely throws that out the window with this supervillain team. And these are like the most generic Saturday morning cartoon villains you could possibly think of. I think it was very obvious that whatever villain this movie had would pale in in comparison to Titan, the villain of the first movie. But still, these are such generic, unremarkable Saturday morning cartoon villains. And yes, fine, I'll say it. Throughout the whole movie, Megamind tries to stop the Doom Syndicate when he could very easily just shoot them with the dehydration gun. God, I wish I had come up with that first. My review came out before his review after all. Now, to give the movie a tiny bit of credit, there are a few interesting ideas in this movie that I think could work for a Megamind sequel if this was a better movie. There are other villains in this movie. They're a lot more minor when compared to the Doom Syndicate, but they are there. And a common theme is that they hate the fact that Megamind has become a superhero for Metro City. And on paper, that would make for an interesting concept. That could be executed well. They feel betrayed by the fact that Megamind had turned over to the good side. That is an interesting idea that is unfortunately wasted in an otherwise bad animated movie. Watching this movie, it was just unbelievably exhausting for me. Everything that made the first Megamind so good is seemingly gone in this movie. The first Megamind was a movie that anyone of any age could enjoy. This is a movie that like only young kids can really enjoy it, and I don't think they would enjoy the movie all that much. They took my goat over here and they turned him into f***ing Paw Patrol. They turned him into that ladybug cartoon. Like, what the hell, man? You can't do that. You can't do that. And yet, at the same time, despite everything, I don't really have the energy to hate this movie that much. Because again, this movie just feels like low-hanging fruit to me. Is this movie bad? Of course, it is. Don't get me wrong, but again, it doesn't feel right for me to like criticize this more than like Joker 2, because Joker 2 is a real movie. This is just low budget straight to streaming slop. It feels a lot more unfair to hate on this when compared to like Madam Web, because Madam Web was a proper theatrical movie. No duh, this movie is worse than like Kung Fu Panda 4, because Kung Fu Panda 4 was like a proper movie. It kind of feels off for me to like really hate this movie and go into detail about why it's bad, because it just feels like low-hanging fruit. But at the same time, I cannot deny this movie is really f***ing terrible. A complete insult to the original Megamind. Oh yeah, I brought up earlier how this whole thing was supposed to be a TV show, and then this ended up being a sequel. Yeah, well, as it turns out, on the same day this came out, there was a TV show, Megamind Rules. And I don't know what it is, but I kind of don't hate Megamind Rules as much as Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. It's obviously not a good show, but you know, it's a lot of the problems that Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate had become a lot more forgivable for Megamind Rules, considering the fact that it's a TV show. The lower quality animation, the different voice actors, you know, it becomes a lot more understandable. If this was a Nickelodeon cartoon from like 2012, I don't think anyone would really care about it all that much. Even with all of that in mind, no pun intended, Megamind Rules unfortunately does not rule. In fact, it's also quite disappointing. It's not as awful as Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, but it's also not the comeback that Megamind deserves. Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate is yet another movie on this list that makes me question who was this movie made for. The people that watched the original Megamind as kids in the early 2010s that are now grown up, they're not going to enjoy this movie at all because it feels a lot more babyish in comparison. And then kids are not going to enjoy this movie either because they don't know who the hell Megamind is. I don't think they're going to care about this niche DreamWorks movie from the early 2010s. This movie is trying to cater to an audience that doesn't care about Megamind, all while completely ignoring the audience that actually does care about Megamind. What a shame, really. What a shame. And with that said, it is time to finally move on to the bottom 5. Get ready, folks. This is when things start to get really, really ugly.